On what was supposed to be an ordinary run to the grocery store, I found myself puzzled when I noticed the milk and cream aisle was completely wiped clean of the local brand I usually buy. Not a single carton left. I flagged down one of the workers to ask about it, and her eyes went wide. "You have not heard?" she asked, clearly surprised. "There was a recall. They say some illness broke out with the cows and even the farm workers." "A recall? That brand?" It felt off. I specifically choose their products because they take exceptional care of their livestock. The cows are pasture-raised, sturdy, and grass-fed. You can drive by their farm and see the animals roaming freely, grazing peacefully. Not stuck in some grim pen up to their knees in filth. And then it hit me, grass. "Oh no, really?" I asked, my voice shaky, praying I was just overthinking things. Her answer dashed my hopes. "Yeah, apparently a bunch of the cows started wasting away even though they were still eating. Word is, it is some kind of parasite. Damn it." Thanking her with a distracted nod, I hurried to the back of the store to grab a gift for a certain Huntsman, already pulling out my phone to call Mason. Soon enough, we would learn that this farm was not the only one dealing with the so-called hunger grass. The beef supply had been hit, too. Another outbreak had taken place a few miles away, at a different ranch. Between contaminated stock being pulled and folks panic buying like the world was ending, the shelves at our local stores were starting to look bare. I had to drive to another town just to get some essentials. This much was clear. The placement of the hunger grass was intentional. Whoever did this knew exactly how destructive it would be. From what we could tell, the grass must have been planted in the pastures where the cows grazed, but to someone at Orion it would look no different from regular grass. That is where the real trouble began. The last thing we needed was for one of us to get cursed, especially since we had no clue if it would affect the dead duo. I do not need to explain why it would be catastrophic for a vampire or draugr to develop uncontrollable hunger. Bottom line, we needed the help of a neighbor to locate the grass and fast, before more people or animals got exposed. Or worse, before the culprit decided to spread it even further. When Mason picked up, I wasted no time. "The hunger grass is at Hilltop Acres." He let out a long sigh. "Oh, fantastic. Just what we need." "Well, crap. Could not have said it better," I muttered, grabbing a fancy-looking bottle off the shelf and heading for the checkout line. I am planning to swing by the mechanic's shop, see if I can talk him into helping me out. And I am grabbing another offering to see if he knows anything about who might be behind this. "Good idea," Mason replied. "But listen, I do not want you going there alone. Since we do not know the full extent of this mess, I am sending Mark to meet you." I frowned. Mark? The last time he and the banjo-playing lunatic crossed paths, they nearly tore each other apart. "Yeah, well," Mason shot back, "I am about to meet with wildlife enforcement, so I cannot go. The mechanic will get grouchy if I send Lily, and besides, she cannot drive. And Claire? She is scared stiff of him, and you know as well as I do that he would eat that fear right up. So who does that leave?" "Fine," I grumbled, picking up a loaf of bread from the shelf. It slipped from my hand, and as I bent to retrieve it, I added, "Just do not act surprised when this goes sideways." He brushed it off. "Call me if something happens." Two of the most volatile non-humans I know forced to work together. What could possibly go wrong? When I arrived at the mechanic's shop, Mark's truck was already in the parking lot. As he stepped out, I greeted him with, "If you can play nice with the other kid, there might be ice cream and pizza for the whole class later." Mark chuckled. "I cannot promise I will not finish a fight, but I swear I will not be the one starting it." "Sure," I said, unconvinced. Inside, we found Dale, the Huntsman, dealing with a particularly difficult customer. To Dale's credit, his face was calm and composed, even though I could tell he was picturing this guy as his next hunt. The guy, waving his phone like a trophy, said loudly, "I got a voicemail. Did you listen to it?" Dale asked, voice flat. The customer faltered before retorting defensively, "Well, you always leave a voicemail when it is ready, so I just came down here." Mark and I exchanged knowing looks. We dealt with this kind of nonsense at Orion all the time. Sir, Dale explained with exaggerated patience, I left a message to let you know I had to order a part. It is going to take longer than expected. The guy jammed his phone back into his pocket, puffing up. So, my wife wasted her time driving me all the way here for nothing? Is that what you are saying? Dale shrugged, smiling like a man who had mastered the art of not giving a damn. That is why I left a message. Do not get smart with me. The man snapped. Just call me when it is done. Will do. Dale replied cheerfully as the guy stormed out, almost running into Mark on his way. Charming, I commented dryly. Dale, still grinning, muttered under his breath. He will be even more charming when his heart stops. Feeling a little bad for the poor idiot after that remark, I approached the counter, holding out the bottle I had picked up earlier. Think you can lead us to the hunger grass soon? Dale studied the bottle before asking, which patch? I blinked. Wait, there is more than one? Yup, he said, taking the bottle. Somebody is real mad, and for a damn good reason. Mark, clearly losing patience, cut in. And that reason would be? Iolo shot Wes a disdainful glance, the kind usually reserved for unruly kids shrieking in public, then turned back to me. Anyway, you familiar with that housing development? The one that keeps spreading every year like some kind of damn cancer? If I'm not mistaken, Breyer took out a couple of contractors working for him a few months back. Ah, that one. Yins, remember the false tree incident? Same developers. Word among the locals was that they were gearing up to expand again. Naturally, there had been protests and petitions to stop it, but it seemed like those in charge had learned all the wrong lessons. Instead of leaving the forest alone entirely, they just decided to spare the specific patch of woods they'd already gotten in trouble over. When they looked at those towering trees that kept us cool in the summer and bathed our town in fiery autumn hues, all they saw was profit. Undeveloped land. More zeros on a balance sheet. This time, it wasn't just a small corner of the forest at stake. Their actions were endangering the entire county, and whoever was calling the shots needed to be stopped. Immediately. When I asked Iolo to excuse me so I could call Victor, the mechanic looked mildly annoyed but waved me off. I left him and Wes to their verbal sparring and stepped outside to bring the boss up to speed. Victor answered on the second ring, his voice heavy with exhaustion. You've got to be fucking kidding me. These assholes again. You'd think they'd have learned by now. I sighed. It's not just local superstitions. Don't they ever wonder why so many of their construction crews get attacked? Or why their residents have to call us every other week? As long as it's not their problem to deal with, they don't give a shit. Victor snapped, though his tone shifted after a pause. It became thoughtful, dangerous. Actually, that gives me an idea. A bad one. I tensed. What kind of bad? If I told you, you'd try to talk me out of it. And you'd be right to. Fantastic. That was exactly what I needed to hear. Victor didn't elaborate, though. Instead, he said, focus on clearing the hunger grass. I'll handle this. Trust me. I do, I assured him, though it wasn't easy. Speaking of Victor, I know a few of Yin's have been worried about him after what happened during the mayor's visit. Here's a quick tangent to put your minds at ease. A few days ago, Victor opened up about that night. Apparently, Breyer had caught him under some mistletoe, oak-grown no less. Out of respect for Victor's privacy, I won't get into specifics, but let's just say the kiss went way beyond your average holiday tradition. To Breyer's credit, he seems to understand consent better than Iolo does. Not that the bar for wild huntsman is anywhere above rock bottom. What the hell is wrong with me? Being attracted to someone like him? Victor had asked me, eyes distant. Nothing's wrong with you, I'd replied firmly. Don't you think you're being a little too hard on yourself? How could I not? He countered. I've seen Breyer at his worst. Making thorns the size of knives grow out of people's skin. Controlling their bodies with vines that burrow into their muscles. I winced. Yeah, that's horrible. I wish I didn't know he could do that. and I'm sorry you had to see it. But even so, your feelings aren't as bizarre as you think. You're not human anymore, Vic. Between running Orion and your dietary needs, it's hard to imagine things working out with a regular person. He'd nodded slowly, mulling it over. And besides, I'd added, trying to lighten the mood, Briar does have some redeeming qualities. I hate to admit it, but he's kind of funny sometimes. Victor had scoffed. He quoted that mesothelioma commercial at me before the kiss. I couldn't help it. I snorted. Fucking Briar. Victor had nodded wryly. Yeah, fucking Briar. So, for those of you worried about him, Victor's okay. Just conflicted. Understandably so. Now, back to the hunger grass. Before hanging up, Victor emphasized that dealing with it was the top priority. He told me to call for backup if I needed it and not to stress about non-emergency cases. When I walked back into the shop, it was like stepping into a middle school argument. Okay, Tinkerbell, Wes sneered, rolling his eyes. What the hell happened while I was gone? I asked no one in particular. Iolo chuckled, raising an eyebrow. That the best you've got, boy? Just as mediocre with words as you were with that sword. Couldn't even tell I was screwing with you. Wes stayed cool. You talk real tough for someone I could kill with a can of Raid. Iolo threw his head back, cackling. Before things could escalate further, I stepped between them. All right, I don't know what was said while I was outside, but we've got more important things to worry about. Can we please focus? It was a strange feeling, playing the peacekeeper for once, like a fish that somehow ended up on dry land, watching two squirrels bicker over an acorn. Alrighty, the mechanic said, locking eyes with Wes and smirking before heading toward his shop. Let me lock a few things up, then we'll head out. Wes shot back a sardonic grin. Meet you out there. Once outside, and confident that the banjo bastard couldn't hear us, I turned to Wes.
Sulreit, spill.
What happened while I was gone? Wes exhaled sharply, his irritation still evident. The usual. Dragonfly was being himself, and I didn't put up with it. Sounds about right. He knows you've got a chip on your shoulder, I said, fully aware of the irony. Try not to let him goad you. Wes turned to me, one brow raised in silent accusation. Pot, meat kettle. Yeah, I know, I admitted. That's pretty rich coming from me. I let him get under my skin more often than I should. But the last thing we need right now is to piss him off before we deal with this infestation. You're right, Wes conceded, though a sly grin tugged at his lips. Which is why I'll wait until after we're done dealing with the evil grass. I narrowed my eyes. For what? Before he could answer, we heard the shop door click shut. Iolo emerged, fiddle case in hand, and sauntered to his truck. That gave me pause. Why not the banjo? Asking him outright probably wouldn't get me a straight answer, but I made a mental note to bring it up later. Not that fiddle bastard sounded much better. Actually, no. That sounded worse. Much worse. I should delete that, but I won't. You're welcome for the glimpse into my brain. At the company vehicle, I was relieved to see Wes Hagstone in the glove box. Handing it to him, I insisted he keep it on hand, just in case Iolo decided to get back at him for the raid comment. I also double-checked that we'd brought the bread, both to dispel the curse and in case we ran into the hungry man again. The thought of him lingered in my mind. What if his connection to the hunger grass was involuntary? Could he be trapped the same way Deirdre had been? I didn't know enough about him to say, but the possibility nagged at me. Any idea what we're walking into? Wes asked as we drove. I shrugged. Not really. According to our records, it could have been any number of neighbors, anything from a weeper to a muse. So, we're probably going to learn the hard way. Nothing new for us. Part of me longed for the days when things were simpler, when infestations could be resolved with salt and a line of cream. But in the long run, I knew it was better that Orion had been forced to adapt to these more complicated and powerful threats. A few months ago, we might not have even known where to start with a hunger grass outbreak. The blue truck ahead of us slowed, brake lights glowing before signaling a turn. We were passing rustic acres now, heading down a neglected back road near the farm. That much was expected. The real question was where, exactly, the cursed thicket would be and how we'd avoid trespassing charges. Iolo parked on the shoulder and explained that we'd be trekking through the woods to reach the pasture. Less chance of getting caught, I supposed. Good thing I dressed warm. This polar vortex had turned Pennsylvania into a frozen hellscape. As we followed Iolo into the woods, I gestured toward the fiddle case. "No banjo today, huh?" "Nope," was all he said. Strange. Iolo wasn't exactly the quiet type. Whatever had him on edge wasn't just the looming trespass. His eyes were sharper than usual, his jaw set in a hard line. He was ready for a fight, though against what I couldn't say. That made me uneasy. My hand stayed near Ratcatcher, ready to draw it if needed, while Wes scanned our surroundings, alert for any sign of danger. A low, guttural grunt greeted us as we reached the edge of the forest and entered the pasture. I teared up at the sight of the cows. Their eyes bulged from their sockets, wet with anguish, as if pleading for help. Their winter-thick coats were dull, ribs jutting out beneath the matted fur. Many didn't even have the strength to stand, their labored breathing rattling in the cold air. A few had already succumbed. God, those poor things. Hadn't they been euthanized? Maybe the sheer number of illnesses among both the cattle and the farm staff had overwhelmed their capacity to keep up. Whatever the reason, it was a hellscape. After passing by too many more starving, miserable animals, Iolo suddenly raised an arm to stop us. He turned to Wes, his expression unreadable. "Can you see it?" Wes shook his head, then held up the hagstone and peered through it. Still nothing. The cursed hunger grass looked indistinguishable from the rest of the pasture. "How can we tell this is really it?" Wes asked. The mechanic smirked, tapping his fiddle case lightly. "By all means, step forward if you don't believe me." I sighed, exasperated. Not the time. First, we're trespassing. Second, something feels very wrong here. Iolo tilted his head, still holding that insufferable smirk. "You're no fun today. Unbelievable. If I'm snarky, he complains. If I'm serious, he complains. I can't win." Without dignifying him with a response, I focused on the task. Pulling the bread out of its baggie, I mulled over the best way to spread the crumbs. Where exactly are the boundaries of the grass? To my surprise, Iolo drew the fiddle bow from its case and used it to sketch a line in the snow before me. It was uncharacteristically helpful of him, though his snort hinted at derision. In the gray mist of winter, the bow gleamed like gold. When he removed the fiddle, I noticed its gilded face and intricate laced pattern, entirely unlike the banjo. The opulence of the instrument seemed almost out of place in his hands, and yet it fit him perfectly. "Thanks," I muttered as I began scattering crumbs along the line he'd marked. For once, Iolo refrained from unnecessary commentary, instead positioning himself and lifting the bow to the strings. Wes and I worked in tandem, crumbling the bread, while the mechanic began to play. At first, I tensed, waiting for the inevitable reaction, some sign of the grass responding to his music. But nothing happened. Nothing I could see anyway. The cows, however, were mesmerized. They watched him with wide, hollow eyes, and a few let out deep, mournful moos, as if attempting to harmonize. A cacophony, if you will. Feel free to hate me for that one. I understand. Iolo's music was captivating. For all his flaws, and there were plenty, the man had an effortless talent with string instruments. The fiddle sang with precision and grace, his hands moving like a surgeon wielding a scalpel. His face, however, betrayed no strain. It was as if the music poured out of him naturally. I'd learn later that this song was meant to repel human onlookers. Rustic Acres staff had likely been alerted by the cow's earlier chorus, But once the tune began, all thoughts of investigating were forgotten. With the area blanketed in breadcrumbs, I kept a close eye on the cows, searching for signs of change. If the records about breaking hunger grass curses were accurate, this should have lifted the affliction. But nothing happened. The cows' eyes stayed hollow, gleaming unnaturally in their sockets. The one closest to Wes began to drool, long strings of saliva dangling from its filthy mouth. "Hey, are these guys?" Wes started to ask. Before he could finish, the fiddle's sharp, final note cut through the air, and the snow turned crimson. One by one, the cows' heads toppled to the ground, tongues lolling limply from their slack jaws. Their bodies crumpled after them, knees buckling as if trying to reunite with their severed skulls. I stood frozen, staring in mute horror. Iolo's voice broke the silence, calm and matter-of-fact. "That stuff you read about breaking curses? Wishful thinking. These cows were either gonna die slow and painful, or they'd come after something other than grass. You get me?" I thought of their watchful, unblinking eyes. Still, so still, salivating like we were the most tempting things they'd ever seen. As ludicrous as it seemed, I hadn't considered the possibility that non-humans could become hungry man-style revenants. Orion's records on hunger grass were about to get a significant update. Wes turned on Iolo, fury blazing in his eyes. "You could have warned us." Iolo shrugged as he carefully placed the fiddle back in its case. "Yeah, but would you have listened?" "No, probably not." It wasn't that I doubted Iolo believed what he'd said. He rarely lied, even when it would have made him more tolerable. It was just that Orion prided itself on compassion, even in the face of horrors like this. But if there truly was no way to cure the hunger grass, what he'd done was the most merciful option. The alternative? These cows wasting away until their bodies gave out, or wandering the earth in eternal, insatiable hunger. And then it hit me. If the cows couldn't be saved, what hope did the humans afflicted with the same curse have? Iolo must have seen the realization dawn on me. He stepped closer, speaking low. "I'll take care of it. You and yours ain't any good to me on death row." I half expected a jab about my father, about following in his murderous footsteps. But it didn't come. Instead, Iolo left me with that same maddening enigma he always carried. I hated the outcome. I didn't want to accept that there was no way to help the afflicted. There had to be another option. Still, we did what had to be done. We doused the area in lighter fluid and set it ablaze, watching until the flames burned out to ensure it wouldn't spread. If breadcrumbs weren't enough to break the curse, we couldn't risk leaving anything behind. Back at the truck, sweet, acrid smoke trailing behind us, I called Victor to update him. It went straight to voicemail. I tried Deirdre next. If anyone might know a way to help the cursed, it was her. Couldn't hurt to hope. Deirdre's ability to maintain her composure in any situation has made her indispensable at Orion as our secretary. Not only does she help clients resolve atypical cases on their own, but she's also far better at dealing with people than any of us. What does it say about my colleagues and me that a former weeper, someone who spent most of her existence trapped in a river, has better social skills than we do? Probably nothing good. Of course, her adorable voice doesn't hurt. Not that I'm biased or anything. "Orion Pest Control. How may I assist you?" Her spiel was almost enough to distract me from the Category 5 shitstorm ripping through Mercer County. Almost grimly, I delivered the bad news. The breadcrumb method didn't work. The other end of the line fell silent. I filled the gap by explaining what had happened: the cursed cows, Iolo putting them down, and his plan to take care of the afflicted humans. I could hear her relaying everything to Reyna. Her voice hushed as muffled commotion stirred in the background. After a moment, Deirdre returned. "All right, keep doing what you're doing, Nessa. Just focus on clearing the grass. Once you're done, though, try to keep the mechanic distracted for as long as possible. Reyna and I are going to see if there's anything we can do before resorting to that." There was rustling, and then Reyna's voice came through the receiver. He said he doesn't know if there's a way, not that it's impossible. I don't know if anything I have will fix this, but that doesn't mean I'm not gonna try. I exhaled a shaky sigh of relief. I was hoping you'd say that. I believe in you. Thanks, bestie. She paused, then added teasingly, and I'm gonna remember this next time a certain someone tells me to go touch grass. You hear me, you blood-sucking bitch? Wes, who had been listening quietly beside me, started snickering. That was a yes. The next hunger grass infestation was at a local beef farm. We didn't bother with breadcrumbs this time. Instead, we went straight to burning the cursed area while Iolo gave the cows their last performance. Once again, no one interfered. It struck me as strange. Where was the hungry man? Or whoever had planted the grass? Not that I wanted a confrontation, but surely they'd have a problem with what we were doing. After finishing at the farm, Iolo informed us there was only one thicket left. The last patch of hunger grass was at a construction site. A sign out front boasted about the Avalon, a cookie-cutter housing development destined to be as uninspired as its name. Someone had spray-painted over the sign in bold red letters, "Get fucked!" A poorly drawn penis accompanied the message. The area was a wasteland of cleared trees and piles of dirt surrounding a freshly paved cul-de-sac. The houses were little more than wooden skeletons on concrete foundations. As Iolo hopped out of his truck, he grinned at Wes and said, "Hey, if you happen to spill some lighter fluid on one of these houses and then just happen to drop a match, I might grant you a blessing." Wes shot the construction project a scornful glance. Very tempting. Iolo's grin widened. Nothing like a little arson to spice up an evening. I rolled my eyes. You two can commit all the crimes you want once we finish this. The words came out too much like my mother's, which gave me a minor existential crisis. Iolo clicked his tongue, clearly amused. Dangerous words, Fiona. You say that as if you don't violate the Geneva Convention on a weekly basis. Oh, a little torture builds character. Take you, for example. You were fucking insufferable before all this, but now... He paused, pretending to consider. Well, on second thought, you're still a pain in my arse. Same to you, jackass. The last patch of hunger grass was near some idle construction equipment, waiting to carve out lots for the soulless Grage homes. Bitterly, I thought about how much chaos the Avalon was already causing, even before a single house was completed. If Orion's experience with the last suburban development was any indication, this wasn't the end of it. You might wonder why so many houses are being built in a place as economically downtrodden as Mercer County. The answer is simple: cheap living costs. A decent-sized house with land here costs as much as a bougie apartment in downtown Pittsburgh. And, aside from the occasional neighbor-related catastrophe, it's considered relatively safe for raising a family. For now, though, Mercer County was a battleground, and we had one last stand to make. Once again, the mechanic used the bow of his violin to indicate where Wes should pour the lighter fluid. While they worked, that's when I finally saw him. The hungry man had blended seamlessly into the trees, his skinny, dirt-smeared frame nearly indistinguishable from the surrounding birches. He stood clutching a clay bowl, leaning heavily against a tree to keep himself upright. I'd kept 2 slices of bread in my pocket as a precaution in case I accidentally touched the grass. Since we were almost done, I figured it wouldn't hurt to spare one. Even knowing this offering wouldn't truly alleviate his starvation, I couldn't ignore how weak he looked. Feeling Iolo's eyes on me, I approached the hungry man cautiously, holding out a slice of bread. His hand trembled as he extended the bowl. Carefully, I placed the bread inside before withdrawing my hand. He began picking at it with shaking fingers. "I remember you from before," he grunted between bites, his voice hoarse. "Is this offering given on your behalf or someone else's?" Mine," I replied, then hesitated. "Does the bread help at all?" The hungry man finished the slice quickly, licking his lips. "Not in the way you'd think." "Would you mind elaborating?" I asked politely, Throughout my damnation, I've grown to appreciate flavors like no other, he said, flashing an incongruously perfect smile as he slumped back against the tree. Haven't you noticed how even something as simple as bread tastes exquisite when you're ravenous? I never thought of it that way, I admitted. His head lolled weakly as his gaze shifted to Wes and Iolo. Both of them were waiting, Wes looking concerned with a matchbook in hand, while Iolo glared at me impatiently. Suddenly, cold, bony fingers wrapped around my wrist. Startled, I froze as the hungry man's other hand covered my eyes. His voice echoed in a haunting cacophony, as though an army of starving revenants whispered from every direction. Through the noise, I faintly heard Wes calling out, but the words were indecipherable. The hungry man's hands fell away, his voice rasping, "Use it well." Before I could react, Wes struck a match, and the hunger grass ignited. The air filled with the acrid stench of burning flesh as the flames engulfed the hungry man. To my horror, he began to burn with the thicket, his eyelids falling shut as a joyous smile spread across his face. He tilted his chin toward the sky. Bile rose in my throat as I stepped back. The hungry man whispered, "Finally!" He burned like a candle, the flames consuming every inch of his body. Skin melted away to reveal stringy muscles, and the heat radiating from the blaze stung my face. Someone placed a hand on my shoulder, pulling me back, but the black cherries mingled with the sickening scent of incinerated flesh and hair sent me dry-heaving. When the fire finally died, the snow around the site had melted, leaving a ring of wet, brown grass. Smoke rose from the scorched bones of the hungry man. "What just happened? Are you all right?" Wes asked urgently. Between whatever the hungry man did to me and how quickly everything unfolded, my mind was struggling to keep up. A headache pounded behind my eyes, and my vision seemed off. Iolo's shadow caught my attention. It wasn't right. Wings and spikes twisted unnaturally within his silhouette, though he still looked human as he scrutinized me with hazel eyes. "Okay, well that's new," I muttered. The mechanic chuckled, glancing down at Iolo's shadow. "Well, I'll be damned." As I recovered, I became uncomfortably aware of the mechanic's grip on my shoulder. I shrugged it off, and while Iolo let go, he gave me a withering glare. Wes wasn't letting it go. "You want to fill me in?" The mechanic sighed, clearly annoyed at having to address Wes again, but he kept his tone neutral. "Fucker gave her the second sight. Means she can see shit she's not supposed to."
Jesus Christ.
I glanced around, expecting everything to look different, but besides Iolo's shadow, everything else appeared normal. Wes hadn't changed, and now that the grass was gone, I couldn't see what might have been different about it either. "So, I'm going to start seeing weird shit?" I rubbed my eyes, trying in vain to ease the throbbing behind them. "That's just fantastic." I know someone will inevitably point out, "Nessa, that's a good thing." Hypothetically, yes, it could be useful in my line of work. But people have gone mad from glimpses behind the veil. The hungry man's gift came with a price. And besides, it had already been a long day. Unfortunately, it was about to get longer. The mechanic began packing up his fiddle, announcing, "Well, now that that's all taken care of, as delightful as this has been, it's best we part ways." Wait, Raina and Deirdre might not have found a treatment for the others affected by grass sickness yet. We needed to stall him. Wes and I exchanged a glance. He held up a hand toward the mechanic. "Hold on. We still haven't figured out what caused the grass in the first place." Snapping the violin case shut, Iolo replied, "Well, she ain't gonna show herself while I'm here, so you'll have to come back later." Not wanting to sit through another round of lovers' quarrel. Bloodsucker edition? No regrets, Wes? I cut in, "Who is this she? You familiar with the Wood Maidens, Fiona?" Of course. No wonder this neighbor wouldn't show herself. Wood Maidens are typically found in Scandinavian countries, but they've started appearing in forested areas of the US and elsewhere. They can change their appearances, often posing as stunningly beautiful young women to lure men deep into the woods. They're also said to be hunted by the wild hunt, the feud's origin so ancient no one remembers what started it. Iolo continued, wandering toward his truck. Personally, I don't give a flying fuck about him. That's Woden's faction, not ours. Doesn't stop em from being real skittish around us, though. Wait, what's the feud about? I asked, hurrying after him. He shrugged. Fuck if I know, fuck if I care. Probably one of em wouldn't spread her legs for a huntsman. My lip curled in disgust. Classy. Wes, in a last-ditch effort to keep Iolo here, decided to light yet another proverbial fire. Imagine that. A huntsman resorting to violence when a woman rejects him. Iolo stopped walking. For a moment he laughed, shaking his head. Not good. I tried to signal to Wes that this was a terrible idea, but he didn't notice. Iolo half-turned, smiling his usual unsettling smile. Is that what she told you when you got hired on? No, I snapped, the headache growing worse. I'm not involved in this whatsoever. Just calling it like I see it, Wes said calmly. But mostly, I see yet another wild animal that's needed muzzling for a while. Iolo's laugh sent a chill down my spine. And you think you'll be the one to do it? You've been fixin' for a rematch, haven't you, bloodsucker? Wes didn't hesitate. If it weren't for your king showing up, you'd be wingless. At best. At worst, you wouldn't be here right now. Is that right? Iolo chuckled darkly, withdrawing his violin from its case. I felt rough. Still do. Unsure, I asked, Hey, if you two are going to kill each other, can I leave? I need to overdose on an entire bottle of Excedrin. It wasn't technically a lie, but what I really intended was to find Raina and Deirdre. I needed to figure out what was going on with them. The mechanic side-eyed me. Yeah, go on ahead. You're not going to want to see this, Fiona. Wes handed me the car keys without taking his eyes off Iolo. Before leaving, I whispered to the mechanic to please not kill my colleague. He didn't react. As I walked away, I heard gunshots and the haunting sound of a fiddle behind me. I don't know the outcome of their fight yet. Raina isn't answering her phone, and I still haven't heard from Vic. I'm heading back to the office, hoping someone left a note or some kind of clue about where they might be. I'll keep Yins posted.